The steady rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only thing keeping Kennedy grounded in reality, a sharp contrast to the chaotic blur of pain tearing through her body. She gripped the cold metal railing of the hospital bed, her knuckles turning ashen as another contraction seized her abdomen, squeezing the breath from her lungs. Sweat beaded on her dark skin, rolling down her temples, but no one moved to wipe it away. Standing at the foot of the bed, her husband, Trevor Davis, looked at his watch with the impatience of a man waiting for a delayed flight, not a man watching the birth of his first child. Beside him stood his mother, Helena, her face pinched in a mask of disdain, her arms crossed tight over her chest. And then there was Brittany, the woman Kennedy had been told was a specialist, a private nurse hired by Helena to ensure the best care, was currently loading a syringe with a clear liquid, her back turned to the door. Kennedy tried to speak, to ask what the medicine was for, but her throat was dry, raspy from hours of labor. She saw Brittany catch Trevor's eye. A subtle nod passed between them. A cold dread, colder than the sterile hospital room, washed over Kennedy. They weren't trying to help her deliver the baby. They were waiting for her to die. Before we reveal the shocking truth behind that syringe and how Kennedy fought for her life against the people she loved most, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. You need to see how justice gets served in this story because trust me, you won't predict the ending. To understand why a man would stand by while his wife was eliminated, we have to go back 2 years. Kennedy was 26, a powerhouse architect in Atlanta, carving out a name for herself in a field dominated by men who looked nothing like her. She was self-made, brilliant, and fiercely independent. Then she met Trevor Davis at a charity gala. He was the heir to a logistics empire, charming, attentive, and seemingly awestruck by Kennedy's drive. He didn't seem intimidated by her success. He celebrated it. He sent rare orchids to her office, surprised her with tickets to the opera, and listened to her talk about structural integrity for hours. For the first time, Kennedy let her guard down. She ignored the subtle warnings from her brother, Marcus, who didn't trust the way Trevor's smile never quite reached his eyes. She ignored the way Trevor would casually steer her away from her old friends, claiming he just wanted her all to himself. 6 months later, with a diamond the size of a grape on her finger, Kennedy said, "I do," in a lavish ceremony that felt more like a corporate merger than a wedding. The first crack in the facade appeared the day Kennedy met Helena Davis. Trevor's mother lived in a sprawling estate that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. When Kennedy extended a hand, Helena didn't take it. She just stared, her gaze raking over Kennedy with unconcealed disgust. Helena turned to her son and asked if this was a joke, speaking as if Kennedy wasn't standing right there. Trevor laughed it off, squeezing Kennedy's waist and whispering that his mother was just old-fashioned, that she would come around. She never did. As the months bled into a year, the isolation intensified. Trevor suggested Kennedy take a sabbatical from the firm. He said she looked tired, that he made enough money for both of them, that a wife of his stature shouldn't be stressing over blueprints. Slowly, without realizing it, Kennedy's world shrank. Her bank accounts were merged with his. Her car was traded in for one in his name. Her friends stopped calling because Trevor always forgot to pass on the messages. Then came the pregnancy. When Kennedy showed Trevor the positive test, she expected joy. Instead, she saw a flicker of calculation in his eyes. He smiled, yes, but it was tight practiced. He kissed her forehead and said everything was going to change now. He was right. Helena became a permanent fixture in their home. She moved into the guest wing, claiming she needed to oversee the heir's development. She criticized Kennedy's diet, her sleep schedule, even the music she listened to. Kennedy felt like an incubator, not a person. And then Brittany arrived. Helena introduced her as a distant cousin who needed a place to stay, a quiet girl who was studying nursing. Kennedy, exhausted and hormonally emotional, welcomed the help. She didn't see the lingering looks between Trevor and Brittany when they thought she was asleep. She didn't notice how Brittany's hand would brush against Trevor's arm a little too long at the dinner table. The turning point came when Kennedy was 7 months pregnant. She had woken up in the middle of the night, parched, her ankles swollen. Waddling down the hallway toward the kitchen, she heard voices coming from the study. The door cracked open just a sliver. She recognized Trevor's voice, low and angry. He was saying that it was taking too long, that the timeline was tight. Then she heard a woman's voice, Brittany's. Brittany was laughing, a cruel, sharp sound. She told Trevor to be patient, that the stress on Kennedy's heart during labor would provide the perfect cover. She said something about a cocktail of drugs that would mimic an embolism. Kennedy froze, her hand hovering over her baby bump. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought they would hear it. Then Helena spoke. Her voice was nice. She told them to focus. She said the insurance policy required Kennedy to be dead for at least 24 hours before the claim could be processed, and with the new clause, the baby would inherit the trust, which Trevor would control until the child was 18. Kennedy backed away slowly, the floorboards creaking under her weight. She made it back to the bedroom and locked the door, sliding down against the wood, trembling. It wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. They were planning to kill her. The man she slept beside, the woman she called mother-in-law, and the girl she had welcomed into her home were plotting her execution. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Kennedy looked down at her stomach. She felt a kick, strong and demanding. A surge of protective fury replaced the fear. They thought she was weak. They thought she was just an isolated, naive wife. They had forgotten that before she was Mrs. Davis, she was Kennedy freaking Williams, and she had fought for everything she had. She needed a plan. She needed to survive. The next morning, Kennedy played the part of the tired, oblivious wife perfectly. She complained of back pain, stayed in bed, and let Brittany bring her tea. When Brittany turned to leave, Kennedy poured the tea into the potted plant by the window. She couldn't trust anything anymore. She needed her phone, but Trevor had accidentally dropped it in the pool 2 days prior, and promised to get her a new one eventually. She was cut off. She had to get to the library computer, but Helena was always watching. Kennedy waited until the afternoon when Helena took her usual gin and tonic on the patio. Trevor was at work. Brittany was in the shower. Kennedy moved as fast as her heavy body allowed, slipping into the home office. She logged onto the desktop, her fingers flying across the keys. She didn't email the police. Trevor had friends in the precinct. She didn't email a lawyer. Trevor's firm had them all on retainer. She emailed Marcus. Her brother Marcus had always been the black sheep, the one who didn't fit into corporate boxes. He worked private security now, dealing with people who didn't play by the rules. The subject line was simply, Code Red. The body of the email was concise. They are going to kill me during the birth. Insurance money. Trevor, Helena, Brittany. I'm trapped. The due date is in 2 weeks. Help me. She hit send and deleted the sent mail, wiped the history, and made it back to the couch just as the front door opened. Trevor walked in, looking every inch the doting husband. He kissed her cheek, but Kennedy smelled it on him, the faint, cloying scent of Brittany's perfume. He asked how she was feeling. Kennedy looked him dead in the eye and smiled. She said she felt ready. She said she felt like everything was falling into place. Trevor didn't notice the steel in her voice. He just smirked and said, "Soon, darling. Very soon." 2 weeks later, Kennedy's water broke. It was midnight. The pain was immediate and blinding. Trevor didn't call an ambulance. He called Helena. They loaded her into the car, but instead of heading to the city hospital where Kennedy's OB-GYN practiced, Trevor turned the car toward a private clinic on the outskirts of town. Kennedy gripped the door handle. She asked where they were going. Trevor said the city hospital was full, that Helena had arranged a private suite at a specialized clinic. It was a lie. Kennedy knew it. This was the kill box. The clinic was small, secluded, surrounded by high fences. The staff looked minimal. When they wheeled her in, there were no other patients in the waiting room. They brought her to a room at the end of a long, quiet corridor. No witnesses. The labor was grueling. Hours blurred into a haze of agony. Brittany was there, dressed in scrubs, acting as the nurse. The actual doctor was a man Kennedy didn't know. A man with shaky hands and bloodshot eyes who looked at Trevor for approval before doing anything. Kennedy realized with horror that the doctor was in on it too, or at least paid to look the other way. They hooked her up to the monitors. They strapped her arms down, claiming it was for her safety, that she was thrashing too much. Kennedy struggled, pulling at the restraints. Helena stood in the corner, watching with the cold detachment of a reptile. "Save your energy, dear," Helena said. "You'll need it for the end." The contractions were coming every 2 minutes now, waves of pressure that felt like they were splitting Kennedy in half. But the physical pain was secondary to the terror mounting in her chest. She tugged at the leather restraints binding her wrists to the bed rails. "Why am I tied down?" she gasped, looking frantically between Trevor and the doctor. "This isn't standard procedure. Let me go." The doctor mumbled something about seizure precautions, refusing to meet her eyes. Trevor stepped closer, smoothing her hair back with a touch that made her skin crawl. "It's for the best, Kennedy," he whispered, his voice dripping with faux concern. "You're hysterical. We can't have you hurting the baby." Brittany stood by the four-stand, tapping the syringe she had prepared earlier. The clear liquid inside caught the fluorescent light. A death sentence suspended in plastic. Kennedy's mind raced. Marcus, has he seen the email? It had been 2 weeks. He hadn't replied, but that was protocol. If he replied, they might see it. He would just act. But where was he? This clinic was off the grid. A place for discreet surgeries and hushed-up scandals. How would he find her? She had to stall. She had to buy time. I need ice chips," she croaked. "Please. My throat." Brittany rolled her eyes, looking at Helena for permission. Helena gave a curt nod. Brittany sauntered out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Through the gap, Kennedy could see the empty hallway. No nurse's station. No security guard. Just silence. "Trevor," Kennedy said, her voice dropping to a plea. She had to appeal to whatever shred of humanity he had left. "We're having a daughter. Think about her. She needs her mother." Trevor's face hardened. He looked at his mother, then back at Kennedy. "She'll have a mother," he said coldly. "Brittany is excellent with children." The admission hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He wasn't even pretending anymore. He admitted it. He was going to replace her before the body was even cold. The cruelty of it snapped something inside Kennedy. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She wasn't going to beg. Not to him. Brittany returned with the ice chips, shoving the cup onto the bedside table with a clatter. "Doctor says it's time to push soon," Brittany announced, a malicious gleam in her eyes. "But first, we need to manage your pain levels. Your heart rate is too high." She reached for the four-port on Kennedy's arm. Kennedy thrashed, arching her back. "No, I don't want it. Don't touch me." Helena stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking on the tile. She grabbed Kennedy's shoulder, her nails digging into the flesh. "Hold her still," Helena commanded. Trevor moved to the other side of the bed, pinning Kennedy's arm down. The betrayal was absolute. The man she had vowed to love was now holding her down, so his mistress could inject poison into her veins. "You're pathetic, Trevor," Kennedy spat, staring directly into his eyes. "You're a coward who needs his mommy to do his dirty work." Trevor flinched, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Kennedy needed. She yanked her arm back, slamming her elbow into Trevor's nose. A sickening crunch echoed in the room. Trevor howled, clutching his face, blood spurting through his fingers. In the chaos, Brittany dropped the syringe. It skittered across the floor, sliding under the bed. Helena shrieked, "You stupid girl! Get it! Get another one!" The doctor stood frozen, clearly not signed up for a brawl. "Restrain her properly this time," Helena screamed, abandoning her poise. She lunged for Kennedy's other arm. Kennedy kicked out, her foot connecting with Helena's stomach, sending the older woman stumbling back into the medical tray. Instruments clattered to the floor, scalpels, clamps, scissors. The noise was deafening. But amidst the clamor, another sound cut through. A low rumble, then a crash. The glass doors at the far end of the hallway shattered. Heavy boots pounded on the linoleum. Voices. Angry shouting voices. The door to the delivery room burst open. It wasn't Marcus. It was a team of 3 men in tactical gear, faces obscured by visors. Kennedy screamed, thinking these were hired hitmen to finish the job. But then the lead figure stepped in, ripping off his helmet. It was Marcus. He looked furious, a vein pulsing in his forehead. He held a handgun, leveled directly at Trevor. "Step away from my sister," Marcus growled. The voice was low, terrifying. Trevor froze, blood still dripping onto his designer shirt. Helena tried to scramble upright, fixing her hair. "Who do you think you are?" she demanded, trying to summon her usual authority. "This is a private medical procedure. Get out." Marcus didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes on Trevor. "I said step away, or I will end you right here." Behind Marcus, 2 uniformed police officers entered the room, guns drawn. "Police! Hands where we can see them." The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The predators became the prey. The doctor immediately threw his hands up, backing into the corner. "I was just following orders. They forced me," he stammered, throwing Trevor under the bus without hesitation. Brittany tried to edge toward the door, but one of Marcus's team blocked her path, crossing his massive arms. "Kennedy, are you okay?" Marcus rushed to the bedside, holstering his weapon and pulling a knife to slice through the leather straps binding her wrists. As soon as her hands were free, Kennedy grabbed her brother's arm. "The baby," she gasped. "The baby is coming. Now." The adrenaline had paused the labor for a moment, but now the contractions were back, harder than ever. The stress was sending her body into overdrive. Marcus looked around the room, panic in his eyes. He was a security expert, not a midwife. "We need a doctor," he yelled. "Not him." He pointed at the cowering conspirator in the corner. "Get a real doctor." One of the officers radioed for an ambulance team. "EMS is 2 minutes out," the radio crackled back. But the baby wasn't waiting for EMS. Kennedy let out a guttural scream, her body taking over. "I can't wait," she cried. Marcus looked at the female officer who had just entered. "I've delivered 2 in the back of a squad car," the officer said, stepping forward and snapping on a pair of latex gloves. "Let's get this done." While the officer positioned herself to help Kennedy, Marcus stood guard. Trevor, Helena, and Brittany were handcuffed and forced to sit against the far wall. They had to watch. They had to watch the life they tried to snuff out come into the world. Trevor was weeping now, not out of remorse but out of fear. He kept looking at Marcus, terrified. Helena was silent, her eyes filled with pure hate. Brittany was hyperventilating. "Push, Kennedy. Push," the officer urged. Kennedy bore down, channeling every ounce of rage, fear, and love she had left. She pushed for her freedom. She pushed for her daughter. She pushed to prove to these monsters that she was unbreakable. With one final earth-shattering cry, the room fell silent, followed a second later by a high-pitched wail. The sound of new life. The officer lifted the baby up. A girl. Perfect. Screaming her lungs out, the officer placed the baby on Kennedy's chest. Kennedy sobbed, wrapping her arms around the slippery, warm body. She kissed the baby's head, smelling the blood and vernix, the sweetest scent she had ever known. She looked up at Marcus, who had tears streaming down his face. "We made it," she whispered. Then she looked at the wall. Trevor was staring at the baby. He looked like he wanted to speak, to claim some ownership. Kennedy's gaze hardened into diamond. "Get them out of here," she said to the police. "I never want to see their faces again." As the officers hauled Trevor and Helena to their feet, Helena spat on the floor. "You'll never get a dime, you ungrateful girl. My lawyers will destroy you." Kennedy laughed, a dry, exhausted sound. "You tried to murder me and my child in front of witnesses, Helena. Your lawyers can't fix this. You're going to die in prison." As they dragged Trevor out, he screamed, "It was her idea. It was all my mother. Kennedy, please." He was blaming his mother to save himself. A coward to the bitter end. Kennedy turned her face away, burying her nose in her daughter's neck. But the story wasn't over. Survival was just the first step. Now came the war. The ambulance team arrived and transferred Kennedy and the baby, whom she named Justice, to the city hospital. Marcus rode in the ambulance with her. "How did you find me?" Kennedy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus smirked. "You think I'd let you marry that snake without putting a tracker on your car? I've been tracking you for months. When the car went to this sketchy clinic instead of the hospital, and then I got your email, I knew. I brought the cavalry." Recovery was a blur of police statements, medical checks, and the overwhelming primal need to protect little Justice. Kennedy refused to stay in the hospital longer than necessary. She felt exposed there. Within 48 hours she was discharged. But she didn't go back to the house she had shared with Trevor. That life was ash. Instead, Marcus took her to a safe house, a high-tech fortress in the mountains that he used for his high-profile clients. It was there, surrounded by pine trees and security cameras, that Kennedy began to piece together the full scope of the betrayal. The investigation revealed that Trevor's logistics empire was a house of cards. He had gambled away millions on crypto schemes and underground poker games. The Davis family fortune was largely a myth, held together by Helena's ruthless maneuvering and loans they couldn't repay. The life insurance policy on Kennedy was for $10 million. It was their golden parachute. The plan had been detailed in text messages recovered from Brittany's phone. Brittany, who turned out to be not a cousin, but an exotic dancer Trevor had met in Vegas 2 years prior. They had been planning this since before Kennedy even got pregnant. The pregnancy just accelerated the timeline because the baby provided a sympathetic heir to inherit the money, which Trevor would then control. The trial of the century, as the local papers called it, began 6 months later. Kennedy walked into the courtroom looking like a queen. She wore a sharp white suit, her head held high. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the survivor. Trevor, Helena, and Brittany sat at the defense table. Prison had not been kind to them. Trevor looked gaunt, his charm eroded by fear. Helena looked older, her dyed hair growing out gray, her designer clothes replaced by a jumpsuit. Brittany just looked small and terrified. The prosecutor was ruthless. He played the audio recording from the clinic's security system, a system Helena thought she had paid to have turned off, but the tech guy had just taken the money and left it running. The courtroom listened in stunned silence to the sounds of Kennedy pleading for her life, to Helena's command to hold her still, to Trevor's admission that Brittany would be the mother. The jury looked at the defendants with pure revulsion. When Kennedy took the stand, you could hear a pin drop. She recounted the gaslighting, the isolation, the moment she realized her husband was a monster. She spoke not with tears, but with a cold, righteous anger. She looked directly at Trevor when she said, "You underestimated me. You thought because I loved you I was weak. But a mother's love for her child is stronger than any greed you could ever possess." The defense tried to paint Kennedy as hormonally unstable, claiming she hallucinated the threat. But the physical evidence, the syringe found under the bed containing a lethal dose of potassium chloride, the bruised restraints, the testimony of the doctor who turned state's witness, was irrefutable. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, kidnapping. The sentencing hearing was the final nail in the coffin. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly been disgusted by the evidence, didn't hold back. She sentenced Helena Davis to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling her the architect of a soulless evil. Trevor received 40 years. Brittany, who had cooperated slightly at the end, got 25 years. As the bailiffs moved to handcuff them, Trevor turned to the gallery, searching for Kennedy. "I loved you," he shouted, a desperate, delusional lie. "I did it for us." Kennedy stood up, holding Justice in her arms. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She simply turned her back on him and walked out of the courtroom, the heavy oak doors closing on his screams, sealing his fate forever. 3 years later, Kennedy stood on the balcony of her new penthouse, overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The sun was setting, painting the city in hues of gold and violet. Behind her, the glass doors were open, and the sound of a toddler giggling drifted out. "Uncle Marcus, put me down," Justice squealed. Marcus was chasing her around the living room, acting like a monster, making the little girl shriek with delight. Kennedy smiled, sipping her tea. Life was different now. Better. After the trial, Kennedy had filed for divorce and sole custody. It was granted immediately. She had sold the story rights for a small fortune, donating half to shelters for domestic abuse survivors, and using the other half to restart her own architectural firm. Phoenix Designs was now the most sought-after firm in the city. She built homes that were safe, open, filled with light, the opposite of the mausoleum she had almost died in. She had cut all ties with the past, keeping only the lessons. She watched Justice run out onto the balcony, her curly hair bouncing. The little girl had Kennedy's eyes and Marcus's fearless spirit. She knew nothing of the darkness of her birth. She only knew love. Marcus stepped out, leaning against the railing beside Kennedy. "You okay?" he asked, looking at her face. Kennedy nodded. "I was just thinking," she said. "About what?" Marcus asked. "About luck," Kennedy replied. "I used to think I was unlucky, that I wasted years on a lie. But if I hadn't met him, I wouldn't have her." She picked up Justice, who wrapped her small arms around Kennedy's neck. "And I wouldn't know how strong I really am." The nightmare was over, but the vigilance remained. Kennedy checked her security app on her phone every night before bed. She kept her circles small. She trusted, but she verified. Trevor wrote her letters from prison every week. She burned them unopened. He didn't exist to her. He was just a ghost, a bad memory that faded a little more with every sunrise. But there was one final twist. A week ago, a lawyer had contacted Kennedy. It turned out Trevor's father, who had died years ago, had set up a secret trust that bypassed Helena completely. He had suspected his wife's greed even back then. The trust was designated for Trevor's firstborn child, regardless of the mother. Because Trevor was now a felon and stripped of rights, the control of the trust, worth $20 million, passed directly to the child's legal guardian. Kennedy, the money they had tried to kill her for, the fortune they had destroyed lives to access, had landed right in Kennedy's lap. She didn't need it. She was rich on her own now. But the irony tasted sweeter than any revenge. She set up a foundation in Justice's name, dedicated to exposing insurance fraud and helping women trapped in coercive marriages. Every dollar Trevor's father made would now go to fighting people like Trevor. Kennedy looked at the camera, breaking the fourth wall for the final time. Her expression was no longer one of a victim, or even just a survivor, but of a victor. "They tried to bury me for a paycheck," she said, her voice steady and strong. "They forgot that I'm the one who builds foundations." She looked down at Justice, sleeping peacefully in her arms, the living proof of her triumph. If justice being served brought a smile to your face today, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us bring more of these powerful stories to light. We made it through the fire. Now we just watch them burn.